Oh, I completely forgot I had that. Hi everyone, welcome to Aquatics. If you're new here, my name's Adam. So today I've been doing a lot of tidying up and I realised I've accumulated quite a lot of equipment over the last couple of years. So one of them being filters. So I thought, I haven't done a video on filters. So before I begin, there's no right or wrong answer here. Any filter, in my opinion, is better than none. I know a lot of people will be saying, well, you know, you could have a Wallstad tank and you don't have to have a filter. And yeah, that's true. But to me, that's just doing things on hard mode, really. At the end of the day, we want things to be as easy to maintain as possible. But which filter you choose is up to you. And in this video, I'm just going to go through some different pros and cons of each one to help you make the right choice, really, because you don't always get it right first time. I certainly haven't. Even now, the tank behind me, this one over here, I put an internal filter on it and I had all sorts of problems and I changed it for a canister. A filter just needs to do three things, really. So first one is biological filtration, and that's by providing space for different media like sponges, bioballs, things like that, and all of that surface area for bacteria to colonize within your aquarium. The second one is mechanical filtration, so you want it to be able to trap those sort of particles like, you know, fish poo and uneaten food and dead parts of plants if you're using live plants. And you want it to be able to trap those so you can then clean it later. And the other one, and I think probably quite an important one, is circulation. So it's going to help move water around your aquarium, which is going to oxygenate the water. Certain fish like more flow, so it's going to provide flow for those types of fish. And the other thing is it's going to help prevent sort of stagnant areas of your aquarium where you're going to have possibly swamp-like conditions, which could lead to a buildup of algae, a buildup of cyanobacteria, and smelly water and things like that. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first one we're going to look at is the classic sponge filter. So this is the only one I've actually got because I'm not a big fan of sponge filters, and I'll explain why. So this one is one that you can attach to the side of the tank just with the suction here, and you get two sponges with this. And of course, just there, and if you can see that, yeah, just there is the nozzle for where the air pump attaches. So of course, you also need an air pump. So this is just one I've got lying around. So you'll see these a lot in sort of fish rooms where people are running lots of different tanks. And the reason for that is because if you've got a strong enough air pump, you can run dozens of these off a single air pump, which makes them very cost effective. So these are definitely one of the cheapest options you can get. So as I say, this is one that you stick to the side of the tank, but there's also some that are freestanding, which are the most common that you will see. Now, as I say, fish rooms, multiple setups, you see them in a lot of fish shops, you can move these around and you can have quite a lot of these running in your tank. So you can move them between tanks and they'll be sort of instantly cycled. The other thing these are really good for is they're good in shrimp tanks because this provides quite a big area, these sponges, for where biofilm and bacteria can grow. And you'll often see these where literally there's dozens of shrimp covering them. So definitely a great place for shrimp. The other one is you might want to use these in quarantine tanks where you've not got too much equipment in there because again, they're really quick and easy to set up. You also might want to use them in breeding tanks where you've got a lot of baby fish because there is no sort of power in this, so there's no way of anything getting sucked into the mechanism. So it's quite safe for baby fish and baby shrimp. A couple of the cons really. So the first one is pretty hard to hide that in your tank. So if you've got a nice, beautiful aquascape tank, you don't have to, of course, you can have any tank you want. But if you've got a beautiful aquascape tank, it's going to be hard to disguise that and hide that away. Might not matter to you, might matter to other people. The other thing is that they are quite noisy, both when the bubbles burst on the surface and because you're having to run an air pump, which I'm not currently running any of these, as I mentioned. And it's just because I've got so many different other filter options, really, and that's the main reason. So they don't provide that much flow is another thing because they're not powered. You know, the flow can be restricted or the circulation can be restricted to one place. As the air is pulled through or it's driven through the sponges, it attracts all the dirt to this. When you want to clean it and you lift it out of the tank, a lot of the dirt that's on these sponges will be deposited back into your tank. Now, I've seen people online where they put a bag over it and lift it out of the tank, and that's fine. But very often, a lot of that muck that you've trapped is just going to go straight back in the tank, which you don't want. The other thing is there's no room to do anything else with this, so you can't add any more media to it. So this particular one has two sponges. There are some I've seen now with like bio balls attached to them as well. But that is kind of it, really. There's no other, they come as they come. So whatever you buy is what you've got, and you can't add any more to them. Having said that, it's definitely the most cost-effective way of getting filtration in your tank, definitely the cheapest, and they will always have a place in the aquarium hobby. So they're a good option. So the next one on our list is internal filters, which are, well, internal powered filters, shall we call them. So I've got a couple here. I've got this Oase Bio Plus here, which is quite a big one, and I've got this small Superfish one as well. So these have a pump inside of them. Again, I'm not really using these in my tank at the moment. I did use this one in the Rasbora tank, which is that one, and I did a video where I changed it over for a canister filter. Now I'll go over the reasons why in a minute. So one of the biggest pros is because they are powered, you're going to get good circulation all around your tank. With this one, as you can see there are two baskets where these come with sponges, but you can actually change the sponges out and add different media. So that's a bonus. With the other one, the small little Superfish one, this just has a little foam, black foam in the bottom here, which, there you go. Now, obviously you could cut that down and add more stuff to that, which makes them a really good option. So they're powered, so you get the good circulation, and you can adapt them and add more media. So one of the biggest cons, again, is bulky. Look at the size of that. That is really hard to hide in your aquarium, and you almost need to sort of build your tank around where these are going to go. So they can be ugly. You might not mind that. As I say, if you've got a nice aquascape tank, you don't really want to be seeing any equipment, but if you've not, and you've just got a fish tank, then you might not mind. Personally, for me, I don't like anything in there if I can help it. But yeah, so bulky, I mean, even that one, which is quite small, it's a little bit easier to hide, but then it's smaller, so it's going to have, you know, less of a turnover. So you couldn't always use a small one like this, depending on the size of your tank. This one, I think, is rated up to 100 litre tanks, but it's huge. I mean, look at it, it's massive. Again, when you want to clean these filters, most of the time you have to lift them completely out of the tank, which means any water that's draining through is going to put some of that dirt back in the tank. With this one, with the Oase one, this one here, this front cover is magnetic. Let's see if I can do it. Yeah, so it's magnetic. So you can just lift that entire thing out and all of the water stays within the basket. So Oase have thought of that with that one, which is good. The other thing is, and it doesn't happen very often, but it happened to me with this one, with this Oase one, is as this was suctioned against the corner of the tank, you can see that between the suction pad and the corner of the filter there's a gap. And when the water level dropped, it created an opportunity for fish to get behind there. And I did lose a rummy-nosed tetra and a shrimp because of that. So that immediately put me off internal filters. Prior to that point, I hadn't been using them. So that's a concern as well. The other thing is that you've got the grills, which everything gets sucked into, and depending on how wide those grills are, they might be big enough for baby shrimp and baby fish to get sucked into, so not ideal either. Okay, so that brings me on to sort of the two choices of filter which I usually go for. So the first one is the hang-on back filter. So if I go back to my box of goodies, so I have this one, which is a Superfish hang-on back filter. So you'll probably notice straight away that this pump here would sit on the outside of the aquarium. Now this would mean that you would need to prime this. Now that's not a massive issue. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now this one is cartridge based, so you have, take that off, you have these cartridges here, which you can take these apart and clean them. You don't have to replace them, although Superfish will tell you that you should replace them. And most hang-on back filters, if not all of them, will return water back into the tank with this waterfall feature. So the pros are that you can adapt those hang-on back filters to add more media to them. So I have, in fact, I'll show you in a minute actually, but I have a Seachem Tidal 35 in that tank over there. And that's got quite a deep basket, so there's room there for chemical media, there's room for biological media, and there's a sponge in there as well. And I really like those filters. Now the Seachem Tidal actually has a pump inside, or it sits inside the aquarium, so you don't need to prime that one. The biggest thing and the reason I like these is because the that sits on the edge of your aquarium. So other than the sort of pipes, which will come down here, and the waterfall part, there is nothing else in your tank. So if you've got if you've got a nice planted tank, or even if you just don't like things in your aquarium, hang-on backs can be quite effective. The other thing is that this waterfall feature here is quite a nice aesthetic, and if you've got a sort of a light which hangs over the top of the aquarium, like a spotlight, you might get a nice shimmering effect, which I quite like. So the biggest cons with these is, as I've mentioned, if the pump is on the outside of the aquarium, most of the time you're going to need to prime it, and it might not always restart if there is a power cut, which is a consideration that you need to make. And what could happen is sometimes, and I've seen it, the water drains back into the tank, the power comes back on, and these motors burn themselves out because there's no water inside the tank and they won't reprime themselves. So that can be a problem. With the Seachem Tidal 35, which is over there, the pump is inside the tank, so that doesn't have that issue. It just primes automatically, which is great. And one of the reasons why I think out of hang-on back filters, the Seachem Tidal range is probably the best one you can get. The other one would be the Fluval Aqua Clear or something, but I don't think you can get them in the UK, or if you can, they're very difficult to come by. But the Seachem is really good. So again, just tying in with the sort of waterfall feature, is if you've got floating plants, which I like to have in my tanks, you might need to find a way of anchoring the floating plants into one corner of the tank or another, just to make sure that the waterfall feature doesn't push them under. I've had that quite a few times and it just rots the plants. Floating plants don't like to be moved around, they like to stay in one place. And the other thing, of course, is similar to the internal filters, because they're powered and very often they don't have any protection on the grills or on the intake, baby shrimp and baby fish can easily get sucked up in there, and you know, we know what happens, unfortunately, but that's the thing. So you can put an intake sponge on, so you could take, you know, like a sponge like this that I've got on the sponge filter, you could cover the intake with that and that would protect it. But of course, when you do that, you're going to reduce your flow through the tank. The other thing as well with hang-on backs is because the water is returned via that waterfall feature, dirt can accumulate in certain spots in the aquarium. So if you took that in the back, you might find that there's a corner of the tank where you get a bit of mulm building up, and you have to do that, you know, a little bit more siphoning. So not a massive issue, but you do have to be considerate about where you place it within the aquarium. So the next one on our list is external filters. So these are going to be by far the most expensive out of all of the options we've spoken about, but they have some really good features. So the first one is that when you look at a canister, you're going to have quite a lot of room within there for more media and to change media and things like that, which is going to increase the mechanical and biological filtration of your canister filter. With that, if you've got a high bio load and high waste load, it means that you're going to be able to go a little bit longer between sort of filter cleaning sessions, not water changes, but filter cleaning sessions, because it's going to take longer to sort of build, you know, for the waste to build up, rather than like a hang-on back or an internal, which could build up quite fast. So that's a bonus as well. The other thing is there is minimal equipment inside the tank. You know, very often you've just got the intake pipe and the outflow, which returns the water back to the aquarium. So again, very minimal on offer within the tank. And again, if you've got a nice aquascape tank, you can also upgrade these to like glass pipeware or stainless steel, just to give you a sort of smarter look, really. I mentioned briefly, you know, being able to take more waste in. With that, they're going to have a higher flow rate. So that waste is going to be moving around, or that water is going to be moving around the aquarium at a better rate, which again is going to enhance how much it oxygenates the water, how much flow there is, how much waste gets sucked up and taken into that filter. Some of the cons of canister filters, well, they can be a little bit tricky to set up. You know, there's a little bit more involvement with the pipework and everything that you have to attach. They can be daunting, certainly for any fish keeper really, because water is being taken out of the aquarium and put back in the aquarium. So there's always a chance of leaking. In my experience, I think I've had one filter leak on me, and that was just I think it was an O-ring or something like that. So yeah, it can be concerning. It's very rare that it happens, but yeah, it's always something to think about. Another con is they're by far the most expensive out of all of the filters we've talked about. So, but you know, at the end of the day, you get what you pay for. But they vary. I mean, there's a lot of smaller canister filters which come onto the market now. So I've got the Awaze Filto Smart in the Rasbora tank down there. And I think that was sort of about £80. I don't know what that would be in other conversions. But that is quite a good price. But they can go from sort of £80 all the way up to £500, depending on, you know, how much media's in there, depending on how much water they turn over, the size of them, all the different features. And again, just the last con, really, it's not, well, I suppose it's a con, is again the issue with baby fish and shrimp and things like that. They could get sucked up through the intake. So again, you'd want to use an intake sponge just to cover it. And obviously this is going to add another maintenance element because that sponge within the tank is going to get dirty. But that's something you just need to consider. Okay, so the last one, and sort of not really that common. Well, it might be more common with sort of monster fish keepers and people who keep saltwater tanks where they might have a high bio load or bigger fish in there, is the sump filter. Now, most of the time the sump will sit underneath the tank and water will sort of flow, be like an overflow out of the tank into the sump at the bottom, go through a series of chambers, and then it'll be pumped back into the tank. So I have a sump, well, I sort of sump within the house. So I have an Aqua One Aqua Nano 60 tank, and that has a sump within the back compartment of the tank. Now, I'll admit, not my favourite. I can see the sort of benefits of it, but it's not my favourite. So in that, there is a series of chambers with different media in. So there's biological media, there's sponges and things like that. And then at the end, there is a return pump, and there's also a place to put your heater. And it's hidden behind a sort of a screen at the back of the tank. I'll overlay some footage so you can see it. But the issue is that as much as it provides lots of sort of place to put media, and indeed with sumps, there is absolutely loads of room. And with that, you're going to get far more ability to turn over more water than you ever would from a canister filter or anything like that. You know, if you think about it, if you've got a 300 litre tank and you've got a sump underneath your tank, which is 100 litres, that's a lot of water that can be turned around, far more than you'd be able to fit in a canister filter. And I don't think there's any canister filters that can fit 100 litres of water in. With my Aqua One Aqua Nano, I think it's about 25% is actually within the sump. So it's a 100 litre tank, and 25% of that water, which is behind the sort of screen and is within the sump compartment. One of the biggest cons for me, and why I don't really like them that much, or certainly with the one I've got, is that when I take all the media out to clean it, all of that mucky water sort of drops back into the sump. And of course, once I've cleaned the pump and everything, put the pump back on and turned it back on, all of that muck is going straight back in the tank. And it's a pain because it's quite a deep tank. So to get to the bottom to siphon out the sump chamber, it's a nightmare. Now, if you've got a sump under your tank, of course, it's going to be far easier to clean all that mull out. For me personally, I don't like that. The other thing is that there's a certain amount of plumbing involved with sumps, especially if it's under the tank. So there's always a risk of leaks. So that's the main sort of consideration to think about, is that you've got the issue of leaks. And if you're doing it yourself or setting one up yourself, you need to look at drilling the tank and things like that. So again, big concern with leaks. You really need to know what you're doing. There are some tanks on the market which have the tanks already drilled, and you could use a sump if you wanted to, such as, I think it's a Fluval Sienna, which I believe that comes with a canister filter, but I don't see why you couldn't just exchange that for a sump if you wanted to. So yeah, again, sumps, like I said, they're for sort of high-end or higher-end installations, I would say, where you need to be turning over a lot of water and you need to have the ability to have a lot of media in there. But again, if you can afford it and you want to do it, by all means, go right ahead. It's another good filter option to have. So there you go. I've just covered all of the different sort of filters that are available and different pros and cons. My favourite personally, and I've probably mentioned it, is the hang-on back filter and the canister filter. The reason for that is because, given I like planted tanks and I like to sort of do aquascapes, or, you know, as aquascapey as I can, I don't want anything in the tank really. I want as little on show as possible. And I like the option to be able to add and change media to them, and I find that you get the better options with hang-on back filters and with external canister filters. The other thing, of course, is that all of the waste is outside of the tank, so for maintenance and things like that it's much easier, and there's very little chance of any muck being pumped back into the tank, which is another bonus. But as I mentioned at the start of the video, ultimately there's not really any right or wrong answer here. This is your choice and it's whatever suits your needs. I mentioned quite a lot in the video that, you know, if you've got an aquascape, you don't want too much on show in the tank, but not every tank has to be an aquascape. How we keep fish is completely subjective, and there's a lot of things online that sort of people are quite judgmental about how others keep their fish. But the way I like to see it is if your fish are alive and they're eating and they're thriving, it doesn't really matter how you've kept your tank. You know, if it's full of plastic ornaments, so what? That's your choice, it's your tank. So long as those fish are healthy and alive, then you've done a good job. And the only thing I would say is, in my opinion, I don't think that you should, I know there's lots of opportunities to have no filter aquariums, but to me that's just doing things harder for the sake of doing them harder. You know, at the end of the day, this hobby is both rewarding and taxing, and you want to keep it as easy and as relaxed as you can so you can get the full enjoyment out of your fish. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've got to put all that stuff away now. I've actually got a canister filter in there, which is, I think it's about 20 years old now. I don't even know if it works anymore, but it's for a 300 litre plus tank. So maybe one day I'll get to try it and see if it even still works, but it's down there and it's ready to go. And yeah, I'm just going to tidy up now. So see you in the next video. Bye.